Section 2 air brake test, locomotive air brake test, train air brake inspection test, 5100 air brake test general requirements, 5101 complying with the FRA regulations. The air brake equipment of locomotives of the car must be inspected and tested in accordance with the rules of section, which are based on the Federal Railroad Administration regulations. 5102 employee responsibility. Supervisors are joint responsible for inspectors, engineers, holsters, trainmen, and the condition of the air brake of the air signal equipment on the locomotive of the cars to extend and it's possible to detect defective equipment by the required air brake test. 5103 operating air brake controls. Do not operate the air brake controls on a locomotive for the purpose of performing train air brake tests unless you have been instructed and qualified. 5104 determining rear car air pressure. During air brake tests, usually most efficient following method to determine air brake pressure at the rear of the train and the cut of the cars. Telemetry has been qualified in accordance with Rule 5751 qualifying telemetry of the air brake test. Air gauge on a locomotive coupled on the rear of the train air gauge on the locomotive coupled to the rear of the train or cutout cars. Air gauge in the EOT or marker unit. Accurate handheld air gauge. 5105 determining application release of the rear car's air brake. When making an air brake test, determine the air brakes at the rear of the train have been applied and released. Telemetry has been qualified accurate for the Rule 5751. A 5 psi brake pipe reduction indicates application. A 5 psi brake price increase after an application is made indicates release. Reduction indicates application. Increase indicates a release. Observation of brake pipe piston properly responds to air brake. Observing the brake cylinder piston properly responds to the air brake operation. Observing the brake pipe gauge at the rear of the train responds to the air brake operation. 5106 restoring brake pipe pressure. After the air brake test, make certain that the brake pressure is being restored at the rear of the train before proceeding. 5150 making locomotive air brake tests. 5151 making locomotive consistent with air brake tests. Requirements of this rule: addition to Rule 5152 standing locomotive air brake tests and Rule 5153 running locomotive air brake tests. Section 2, Part 2 of 13. When required, perform the air brake test. When required, perform the air brake test when the locomotive is made up of the added to. B. Proceed to locomotive consistent air brake test following the steps below. Step 1. Secure locomotive consistent against the movement. 2. Testing independent brake. 2. Place independent automatic brake valve in the release position. 3. Confirm the air brakes are released on all locomotives. So you have your release on automatic air brakes and all the air brakes on all locomotives. Place independent brake in full application. Confirm that the air brakes are applied on all locomotives. Place independent brake valve in release position. Testing automatic brake. 7. Confirm the air brakes are released on all locomotives. Part 8 has 3 sections. Make certain application acceptable brake pipe leakage, making a 10 psi brake pipe reduction. After the brake pipe exhaust stops, cut out the automatic brake. Measure the brake pipe leakage to make certain that it does not exceed 5 psi per minute. So you make a 10 psi brake pipe reduction from application except certain applications acceptable brake pipe leakage. After the brake pipe exhaust stops, cut out the automatic brake. Measure the brake pipe leakage to make certain that it does not exceed 5 psi per minute. Testing air brake actuation. Confirm that the air brakes are applied on all locomotives. Actuate the brake cylinder pressure. Confirm that the air brakes are released on all locomotives. Properly position all air brake controls as required. C. Retesting locomotive consistent. If the air brakes does not respond properly, if the brake pipe leakage is more than 5 psi per minute, stop the test and make corrections. After making corrections, retest the locomotive consist. D. Documenting locomotive brake test. Review record pertaining to information section 1 brake test, certifying and verifying the qualified employee has performed a brake test on a locomotive consists that it is to be 1. Added the train constant, 2. A main track line light locomotive is movement. 5152, making a standing locomotive air brake test when required. Making a standing locomotive air brake test when initial taking charge of the light locomotive. After changing ends and the controlling units. After changing ends or controlling units on a light locomotive consists, or before making an initial movement of the light locomotive when cutting away from the train. B. Conducting a standing locomotive air brake test. Make certain that the locomotive remains stationary with the independent brake in the full application position. Reverse lever into forward or reverse position. Generate the field switch on the on position. Throttle in position number 1. Making sure it remains stationary. C. The failure of air brake during the test. If the locomotive moves to the test reveals holding power ineffective, place the throttle in idle position. If necessary, movement must be stopped. Use a handbrake if conditions permitted. Or place the reserve lever in position opposite direction movement and placing throttle in position number 1. 5153, making running locomotive air brake test. Making a running locomotive air brake test as soon as operating conditions permit when making initial movement of light locomotive or making a rare engine. When running a locomotive air brake test as soon as the operating conditions permit, make an initial movement of the light locomotive. Making a change of the light locomotive consists of the changing ends. B. A testing procedure. To make running locomotive air brake tests, follow these steps. Begin moving the locomotive consists. Place the independent brake valve to the point of the application zone that creates a retarding effect. Verify the brake cylinder pressure retarding of the locomotive. Place the independent brake valve in release position. Make certain that the brake pressure reduced to 0 and the retarding effect is eliminated. Make 15 psi brake pipe reduction. Verify the brake cylinder pressure retarding the locomotive. Actuate the brake cylinder pressure. Make certain that the brake cylinder pressure reduces to 0 and the retarding effect is eliminated. If it is heavy retarding effects develop, stop movement. Make sure the MU connections are made properly. If retarding effect is not developed, test is complete, and is not developed, test is complete. Position air brake controls as required. 5200 series, making train air brake inspection test. 5201, making pre-test requirements. Before beginning a brake test, make certain that air hoses are properly coupled in serviceable condition. Angle cocks, end cocks, and cutout cocks are properly positioned. Brake circuit cables are properly connected if the train is equipped with cables well operated with electro-pneumatic brakes. The regulating valve is adjustment to the standard pressure of the train being tested. 5202, testing brake pipe leakage. When the rule requires test brake pipe leakage, comply with the following. Airflow method, AFM. Use the airflow method when the train's control locomotive is equipped with a 2630 or electronic air brake equipment and airflow indicator. Steps 1. Charge the brake pressure at the rear of the cab to 75 psi for the freight train and 95 psi for the trains. That's which said we had have a main air reserve of 110 for Amtrak's and 90 for freight and passenger mixes. 2. Change the brake pressure to the rear of the cab at 75 psi freight of the train, 95 psi passenger train. Verify the airflow indicator shows that the 60 CFM or airflow indicates that the measure of the measured airflow in the CFM. At this point, the leakage test is complete. The 2 test air brake operations continue in step 3. 3. Obtaining the required signal to be in the beginning of the test. Obtain the required signal to begin the test. Make a 20 psi brake pipe reduction. Allow the brake pipe exhaust to stop. Receive the required signal releasing the air brakes. B. A brake pipe leakage method. If the train is not equipped to permit an airflow method test, make a brake pipe leakage test and following the steps below. 1. Charge the brake pressure to the rear of the car 75 psi for freight trains and 95 psi for passenger trains. Obtain the required signal to begin the test. Make a 20 psi brake pipe reduction. Allow brake pipe exhaust to stop. Cut out the automatic brake. Wait 1 minute. Not brake pipe pressure. Note the brake pipe pressure. Measure the brake pipe leakage for 1 minute. If the brake pipe leakage exceeds 5 psi per minute, notify the employee inspecting the cars. Receive the required signal before releasing the air brakes. 5 of 13, Section 2, air brake test, locomotive air brake test, train air brake inspection and test. C. Addressing excessive leakage. If leakage reveals that the airflow greater than 60 CFM or more than 5 psi leakage, examine the brake pipe for leaks and make the repairs necessary to reduce the leakage to the required minimum. D. Documentation of brake pipe leakage. Verify information on the brake pipe test certificate regarding the brake pipe leakage. Information should be required in the automatic flow automatic flow method. And when the airflow is determined 60 CFF, I think that's, I'm not sure what the abbreviation means, but I'm sure it means a flow method or less required. 60 CFI flow method required as amount of leakage per minute. The brake pipe leakage method has been used. 5203. Making Class 1 air brake test. When required, making Class 1 air brake test. The train is originally made of. The train consists of change unless only the change is either one or both of the following. A car or a solid block of cars is added or removed. Removing the one or more defective cars from the train. The train has been off air. The train has been off air for more than 4 hours. A cycle train has been traveled 3,000 miles since the last Class 1 brake test and will designate a special instruction. The train received an interchangeable or train consists of is changed. Cars are picked up, added to intermediate location unless their special instructions designate otherwise. The train extends a haul train having traveled 1,500 miles, designating special instruction. A qualified mechanical inspector will perform an inbound brake inspection designation. Note that a Class 1 brake test is not required. The train consists of the change combination of 1, 2, 3, 4 below. Removing a car or solid block from the train, adding a previously tested car or solid blocks to the train, changing motive powers, or removing or changing the caboose. Changes over the contain 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 of the above made of the train and receive the interchange for the train will move 20 miles or less. In this case, perform a transfer train brake test on the cars and add to the train. Procedures. Train not previously tested test brake pipe leakage in accordance with Rule 5202 testing brake pipe leakage. Inspecting components during the test. When air brakes are being tested on the train cut out of the cars, make certain that the brakes are apply on each car. If the car's air brake is not applied when examined, so make sure that the brakes are applied on each car when being tested for the test brake pipe, and comply with Rule 5211, retesting the air brakes. If air brake cylinder piston travel is current with determined to be 7 to 9 inches body mounted brakes, a maximum of 6 inches truck mounted brakes, or specified with the badge plate on the car. Brake pipe rigging does not bind or follow. Brake equipment is procured properly secured. Retaining valves are in exhaust position. Retaining valve pipes are in serviceable condition. Both sides of the car examined sometimes during the inspection process to observe functioning of all parts of the air brake system. Inspection of the train to ensure the proper release. Inspection of each of the car to make sure that the air brake is released and both sides of the train has received visual inspection before the signal is given to the release brake. A roll by inspection made by the past qualified employee where the train speed does not exceed 10 miles per hour. The locomotive engineering must be notified of the results of the roll-by inspection. Inspection of the train to ensure proper release. Inspection of each car to make sure the air brake is released. Both sides of the train have been received the visual inspection sign and is be given the release brake. A roll-by inspection may be made by pass a qualified employee when the train speed does not exceed 10 miles per hour. The locomotive engineer must be notified of results of the rolling inspection. Testing train have been previously tested. When testing has been made using an outbound locomotive, train had tested using an outbound locomotive, need no further testing. When testing has been made using an air source other than an outbound locomotive, the train testing using an air source other than the outbound locomotive kept in charge must be given additional testing after the outbound is attached as follows. When the test made by using an air source other than an outbound locomotive, step 1. Charge the brake pipe pressure to the rear of the rear car to 75 psi of the freight train of a passenger train to 95 psi. Obtain the required signal to begin the test. Make a 20 psi brake pipe reduction. Make certain that the air brake applies to the rear of the car. Receive the required signal before releasing the air brake. Place the automatic brake in the release position. Make sure that the air brake release on the rear of the car. 5204, making Class 2 brake pipe test. When required, making a Class 2 brake type test, only directed special instruction, verbal instruction to do so. Once instruction, make a Class 2 brake pipe test following the equipment is added to a train and location or other train in the initial terminal. A car is solid block of the cars that have not received a Class 1 brake test before been off air more than 4 hours. Inoperative air brakes cars are tagged and defective equipment tags form 1113 EC on each side. Procedures for making Class 2 brake tests. When making Class 2 brake tests, follow these steps. Test brake leakage in accordance with the Rule 5202, testing brake pipe leakage of the entire train. Make certain that the air brakes on each car are picked up and the rear car applies and remains applied until released. If the car air brake is not applied when examined, comply with Rule 5211, retesting air brakes. If the car's air brakes to apply remain applied for 3 minutes during the retest, comply with the instruction for reporting, tagging, and moving the car. Inoperative air brake is required. If the car's air brake fails to apply, remain applied for 3 minutes during the retest. Comply with the instruction for reporting, tagging, and removing the car from inoperative air brake if required. Step 3. Make certain that the air brake on each car that picked up the rear car of the train release. Each car picked up and the rear car of the train release. Inspection may be performed as the train rolls by, provided the train speed does not exceed 10 miles an hour. The engineer must be notified as a result of the rolling inspection. C. Procedures of additional testing following the Class 2 brake test. Cars given a Class 2 brake test must receive a Class 1 brake test at next forward location where facilities are available to perform a Class 1 brake test. In addition, with the note of the location of the Class 1 brake test will be required at the brake test certificate. 5202, making Class 3 brake test. When required, may perform a Class 3 brake test when the train has been separated, recoupled without any change of the train which the train consists. A locomotive or caboose is changed. Any car or solid block of cars removed from the train. Any one of the following changes are made in the train at the location other than the train's initial terminal. Any one of the following changes are made with the train location other than the train's initial terminal. A car solid block has been previously given a Class 1 brake test and has not been off the air more than 4 hours is added to the train, and the car on the solid block of the car has not been added or switched except to remove the defective cars. Since it was set off, note it is permissible to pick up the cars from more than one track, providing the cars were picked up in the same order that they were set off. Cars or solid block cars in addition with the train receiving Class 1 and Class 2 brake types has not been off the air for more than 4 hours. Procedures of making a Class 3 brake test. Class 3 train line continuity. And the reason of performing the test because the train has been separated, recoupled without any change of the train consists make certain that the brake pipe pressure of the rear car is being restored when the cannot be determined the brake pipe pressure is being restored to the rule 5104 to determine the rear car air pressure. Determine the rear car air pressure applies to the release of the rule 5105, determining the application and release of the rear car air brakes. 2. Class 3 train consists of change when Class 3 brake test for the reason other than what is listed in B1 above. Follow the steps below. Change the brake pipe pressure of the car at the rear at 75 for freight trains, 95 for PSI for passenger. Make a 20 PSI brake pipe reduction. Make certain that the air brake of the rear train applies. Make an automatic brake release. Make certain that the air brake car releases. 5206, making transfer of the train air brake test. When required, making a transfer train air brake test before making the transfer train movement not to exceed 20 miles an hour unless the car has been previously tested. Procedures to make a transfer train air brake test, follow the steps below. To make a transfer air brake train test, follow the steps below. Charge the brake pipe pressure of the rear car 75. Make a 20 psi brake pipe reduction. Make certain that the air brakes apply on each car. Car brake, if fails to apply, remain applied, may be retested per rule 5211, which is requesting car air brakes. We'll get to that. Retested per rule 5211. Defective equipment may be moved to the nearest location where the repairs can be made if defective cars has been properly tagged. 5207, making a helper service air brake test. When making a helper service air brake test, anytime the helper locomotive is added to a train. Procedures to make a helper service brake test. Follow the steps. 1. Receive confirmation to engineer to help locomotive that helper locomotive is properly coupled to the train. If the train brake is applied, make an additional 10 psi brake pipe reduction. The train brake is released, make a 20 psi brake pipe reduction in controlling locomotive. Make sure that the brake pipe exhaust stops. Make a certain air brake of the rear of the train apply. Make a visual inspection on each helper locomotive brake system to determine the brake system operates at 20 psi initiated with the controlling locomotive. 5. Placing an automatic brake handle in the release position on the controlling locomotive. Make certain that the air brakes on the rear of the train release. A helper locomotive inoperative ineffective brakes shall be repaired prior to the use of the removed from the train. 5208, making Class 1A air brake tests. When required, making Class 1A air brake tests as designated in special instructions. Procedures to make a Class 1 air brake test follows the steps. Check the brake pipe pressure of the rear of the car from 75 psi of the freight trains to 95 psi passenger trains. Test the brake pipe leakage according to 5202 testing brake pipe leakage. Make a 20 psi brake pipe reduction. Make certain that the inspection on both sides of the side of the car is done at some time during the inspection process. The air brake applies on each car, brake rigging on each of the car properly secured and does not bind or foul. A car whose brakes have fails to apply the retested per 5211 retesting the air brakes. The car refailing the retest can be moved to the nearest location where repairs can be made and properly tagged. 5209, making of a backup hose or a backup valve air test. Backup hose, backup valve air test. Making. When required, backup hose and backup valve air test. When a backup hose and backup valve will be used to control movement. It consists of the train using the backup hose and backup valve to change. Procedures to make a backup hose and a backup valve air brake test. Follow the steps below. 1. A trainman. Step 1. Who does it? The trainman verifies the air hose coupled from the locomotive to the backup valve. 2. The trainman informs the engineer that the brake test will be made from the backup valve. 3. The engineer changes the air brake system. 3. The engineer charges the brake system. 4. The engineer cuts out the automatic brake. 5. The trainman opens the brake valve to exhaust the air brake at the service rate. 6. The engineer observes the brake pipe, brake cylinder gauges to make certain that the brake pipe pressure reduces the air brake pressure applies on the locomotive. 7. Engineer communicates with the result of the test of the trainman 8. The trainman closes the backup valve. 9. The restores all brake equipment to the normal operating position. A backup running air brake test for the passenger train equipment and additional requirements for the paragraph B. Make the following tests as conditions. 1. The engineer begins the movement and authorizes the test. 2. The trainman opens the backup valve, reduces the brake pipe pressure at a service rate, verifies the air pressure is exhausting freely. 3. The crew verifies the retarding effect is created. 5210. Making a passenger train running air brake test. Making a passenger train running air brake test when departing the train initial terminal. Locomotive engine crews and train crews has been changed. A brake pipe angle cock has not been turned except for the cutting cars from the rear of the train. Electro-pneumatic brake circuit cables between the power units and on cars are disconnected. The train has struck debris on the track. In accordance with Rule 5953, making necessary substitutions for telemetry with an en route failure. Procedures. That's when you have to run a passenger train running air brake test. Procedures. To make a passenger train running air brake test, follow the steps. 1. Keep the locomotive brake beginning the test as soon as the train speed is high enough to prevent stalling. Keep the locomotive brake released during the test. While ensuring the power to the train, keep the using the enough power to keep the train stretched. Apply the train air brakes to sufficient force to make sure that they are operating properly. If the train brakes create a noticeable retarding force, release the brakes and proceed. If the train brakes do not create noticeable retarding force, stop the train, inspect the brakes, correct the problem, perform the procedures again. 5211. Retesting the air brakes. If discovers an air brake has not been applied or does not remain applied, retest the air brakes as follows. Charge the air brake with the rear car 75 psi freight train to the 95 psi passenger train. Make a 25 psi brake pipe production. Measure the time the air brake is applied. If the brake pipe remains applied for 3 minutes, consider the air brake is operating. If the air brake does not apply in less than 3 minutes, consider the air brake is not operating. 5. When freight cars fails to retest the train or origination location set for the carryout, the intermediate location once tagged may be moved to the nearest repair location. 5212. Documentation of air brake tests. Engineering notification Class 1, Class 1A brake tests. Required notification. Engineer must be notified that the air brake test has been satisfactorily performed. The notification include the date and time inspection was made, the number of the freight cars inspected, name of the qualified person performing the test, or ID of the number of the class of 1A and 1A test, location of the test performed. If the notification provided verbally to the engineer must be recorded required information on the brake test certificate. The review of the brake test certificate information of the taking charge of the locomotives and or train. The engineer may review one or more of the sections for documentation of power brake law items. Section 1, locomotive brake test. Section 2, head and train device tests. Section 3, dynamic brake status, total dynamic brake axles, the number of locomotives tagged effective. Section 4, train brake test. Section 5, rear end of the train device test. Section 6, train air brake information, including number of the cars, air brakes, and operative cutout, the rear location and position such cars in training. Section 7, power brake related problems, explanation list relating to the occurrence of the power brake related problems. Example 1, a locomotive has been developed or inoperative dynamic brake en route that has been not previously reported. Example 2, the freight car has had the air brake cut out due to the brake sticking. Transfer notification. Leave in any brake with the written documentation. Engineer control standing of the controlling locomotive, revealing the engineer of the form unless recreated, updated, and the remaining of the control locomotive in the train destination. The engineer must record the pertinent information necessary to keep the air brake certificate up to date. The locomotive engineer who changes the added motive power of the previous Class 1 brake test of the train will see that the brake test certificate information is placed in the controlling locomotive operation cab. The conductor, when updating the train documentation, will note the pertinent information relating to the Class 1A, Class 1, 1A, and 2 and transfer brake tests given to the train or any other block of cars added to the train. C. Notification of air brake test relating to this car is being set out. Leave written documentation in the knuckle, within the knuckle of the car, of the block of the cars, or block of the cars. Verbally notify the yard master and train dispatcher when the car has received a previous test having been kept charged. Information is critically avoiding further unnecessary testing of such cars. Information must include date, time, inspection, and made, number of the freight cars inspected, name of the qualified employee, ID, or the qualified employee if the Class 1 or 1A that performed the air brake test being set out on the train. D. A replacing air brake test certificate. An original Class 1 air brake test information must remain on the train destination. Information not found on the contacting yard train dispatchers reported the absent brake test certificate relating to the train origination of Class 1 brake test information may be received on the CSX mechanical department. Be governed an instruction for the yard master train dispatch and replacing of the air brake certificate. Section 3. Locomotive condition, and locomotive operation.